Well, good day to everybody, and welcome to week 2 of the e-assessment question virtual conference. And we've got some great stuff for you today. Our theme for the week is about assessment and practical implementation. I'm sure actually most people are really keen to learn from other people's experiences in this respect. And our theme for today is assessment on a global scale. And we, as you know, are the Assessment Association who are presenting this conference. And to start with, I'd like to give the opportunity to our headline sponsor, RM Results, just to introduce the conference. So I'm going to hand you over to Tim Downey now.
Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 of the e-assessment question. My name is Tim Downey. I'm Sales and Marketing Director for RM Results. We're delighted to be the headline sponsor for this year's event. Those of you that could join us last week will know that we looked at future gazing and innovation. It was a fantastic opportunity to think about the future and how we as industry professionals can work together to adapt to the new challenges that we face. In the second week, we think more about the practical application of assessment. And I know that for me and my colleagues at RM Results, this will be a really interesting week. We work every day in over 140 countries, supporting our customers with secure, online, reliable assessment systems to ensure that every student gets the result they deserve. This week offers an opportunity for us to learn from others and to talk to each other about how other people are successfully deploying assessment systems in different scenarios around the world. I'm looking forward to this week. I hope you are too. I look forward to seeing you in week 3. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks very much, Tim, for that introduction, and thanks again to RM for sponsoring us for the whole of this event. If you have questions for us, then we've got 3 ways that you can engage. First of all, if you're looking on YouTube, there's a chat box next to the presentation. If you put your questions in there, then they'll be fed straight through to us and we can pick them up. If you've got Twitter, you can send it to us through the hashtag ESS20, which you see on the screen there. And if you don't have access to either of those, then please send us an email at live@eassessment.com and we'll make sure that your question gets into the presentation. So the agenda today looks like this. We've got our first speaker, David Phillips, who I'll introduce in just a moment. He's going to talk about the e-assessment journey and where COVID-19 might take us next. Paul Crump, who's going to talk to us about remote proctoring, and I know there's been a huge amount of interest in that. I've talked to people around the world in the last few weeks who've been inundated with queries about this. And then we were going to hear from Paul Muir about taking computer-based testing to the wider world, but we're very sorry to say that Paul has been taken ill today and cannot be with us. So with a bit of technical wizardry and Tim Burnett, our resident technical guru from BTL, we're going to bring you a short piece of a blog that we recorded with Paul earlier on in the year. And after each presentation, we'll just have a few minutes for questions, and then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So please do make sure you put your questions in the chat box and get your mental juices flowing. So I'm going to hand you over now and introduce you to David Phillips, Managing Director of City and Guilds and ILM, and we're really pleased that he's joined us today and he's going to share his experiences of where the whole experience of what he's had through COVID-19 might take us next. So very welcome, David. Thank you. Nice to see you, and I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much, Graham. And good morning to everybody as well. Thank you very much for joining. So I think, first of all, I just wanted to say how delighted I am to have been invited to speak here this morning, but also actually to congratulate the EAA on having the tenacity and ingenuity, to just adapt their plans and to allow this conference to go ahead and the program to be delivered. I guess, the impact of COVID-19 has changed things for all of us. And while so much of it is not good, it's not a great place to be in, I do think it has, also acted as a catalyst for, a fair bit of progress and a fair bit of change. So again, as hard as things are right now, I do think the longer term actually is brighter. Given how people have actually embraced things in the last 3 months that they quite frankly wouldn't have otherwise. And I think Microsoft, they said a few weeks back or maybe a month back that they've reported 2 years of digital transformation in just sort of 2 months. So I think, despite social distancing, despite the lockdown, it's clearly a relief that we're still able to, connect and, share information as exactly as we're doing today. And as the COVID-19 crisis carries on, it's quite clear that teaching, learning, and actually assessing people online has never been more important or indeed more relevant. So I'm just going to talk a bit about e-assessment, a topic I'm sure you're all very familiar with anyway, and just to reflect a little bit more on the COVID-19 impact as well. So what is e-assessment? I think we all the answer to this question. I think in its broadest sense, it is clearly where technology is used to facilitate or enhance the process of assessment. E-assessment can range from automatically marking multiple choice tests, using software or platforms specifically designed for e-assessment creation and delivery, remote invigilation, remote proctoring. Might be that you're using Skype or Microsoft Teams to facilitate an online discussion, or maybe to view evidence remotely, or even virtual reality to demonstrate a skill like welding, flight simulation, or machinery maintenance. And whilst I think rapid advances continue to be made around large-scale online testing programs, it's actually been around for quite a long time. I mean, I think for at least 30 years, if not longer. And here we are in 2020, of course, where e-assessment is very much more widespread, and we've seen several years, I think, of refinement, not necessarily revolution. So I think it would probably be remiss of me not to talk a little bit about some of the key milestones in the assessment that have gone before. So I'm just going to mention a few things. It's by no means exhaustive, but I think it just gives a flavour and some examples of the attempts made to change, conventional practice. So there's been the paperless exams project that SIA did, the Northern Ireland examining body. SQA worked with BTL, and they conducted some research around tablet-based assessment as a way of capturing candidate responses without the need to transport, paper scripts all over the country. I think in the late 90s, there was a real sort of effort by the government agency QCA to move national key stage testing onto an online platform. And the introduction of MVQs saw the rise of portfolio-based assessment of competence, with evidence being amassed over a period of time, which then in turn saw the proliferation of e-portfolio solutions to capture, track, and also present evidence of achievement. And I think far more recently, over the last few years, the recent expansion of endpoint assessment, I think, is very much allowing that rich history of e-assessment to be fully exploited. And that's absolutely, something you're seeing sort of City and Guilds doing along with other EPA organizations. I think it's been used wherever possible to help to make the assessment more efficient, more accessible in areas of testing, professional discussions. It's helping to share evidence artifacts, and also it's allowing remote observations. And I think actually just reflecting back on, just the last few months and where we are now and will be in the next few months, it's those endpoint assessments that have benefited from e-assessment, I think, that are proving to be the most resilient through the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that's a really important point for us to sort of hold on to. As artificial intelligence becomes ever smarter and more sophisticated, and as businesses need to stay abreast of those sorts of technological advantages to stay competitive, I think it's also fair to assume that the use of e-assessment is only going to develop further over the coming years. And if we look a little bit further afield, we've seen advances in technology-enabled learning and assessment in countries where investment in the actual communications technology and devices is far stronger, for example, in Asia. In Cambodia, Nepal, and Mongolia, 21st century skills-based work could be using online collaborative tasks. The rise of e-learning solutions in India through mobile applications as a means of reaching a much wider range of the 15 to 29-year-old sort of population that needs to be able to engage with learning and development. And we've also seen, I think, pilots in open internet rather than open book exams in places like Denmark. But I think also still, for the most part, it's the private sector, the private education sector and schooling that has driven some of the innovations in these areas. And that I think there is much greater opportunity in the state sector to do more. What I didn't mention as I was going through that sort of brief history was, I think, probably then some of the main concerns around some of those early pilots were fears over, what happens if we do change? And I think maybe that stifled progress a little bit. Today, I think we have a far more pressing and immediate question to answer. What happens if we don't change? If I have one hope for e-assessment as a result of this awful pandemic we're living through globally, it's the wider adoption of e-assessment along with technology more generally to benefit our learners. So what are some of those benefits of changing? So I think at a high level, the assessment benefits are often classified in three ways. Firstly, there's efficiency, so this ability to do things quicker with more precision, less waste, or at greater scale for the same or lower costs. It might be to do with effectiveness, the ability to improve reliability of judgments in real time, identify better patterns and understanding around assessment instruments, and reach new areas of knowledge, understanding skills, or competence-based assessment that might be hard to reach. And then there's efficacy, the ability to create a stronger link between curriculum, learning programs, and assessment. So it has the proven potential, I think, to enable many awarding organisation businesses to become far more efficient and effective, allowing us to assess greater number of students and to a greater degree of accuracy than any sort of human process has been able to do in the past. No longer do the two people, so the assessor and the student, need to be in the same place for assessment, or indeed the invigilation of the assessment to take place. This not only saves cost and speeds up the process, but it can also aid social mobility and regional deprivation. It might give your business a greater reach internationally. So your assessor could be sitting in the UK whilst your student is in the UAE. So I think, in short, technology is a great enabler if it can be harnessed and channeled in the right way. The internet has created huge disruption in many markets where size and history of organizations actually counts for very little when agility and innovation are key requirements for the customer. The current crisis we find ourselves in has only served to strengthen my belief that we must push for further change in the way learning and assessment should be delivered, and how alternative models of delivery should be more widely accepted. This push, though, has to be a system-wide one, as there's not a lot of point in one part of a system adopting change without the rest of the system adopting it as well. So we do need, I think, a whole system level of education to communicate what those benefits are. So what does this all look like from a City and Guilds perspective? So our efforts are very much grouped around supporting the learner skills development journey. And we try and do that. We think about it through recruitment, diagnostics, training, assessment, and certification. And our mission remains very much the same as it always has been. And that's either to help people to get a job or to help get on in the job and then get on to the next job. So all very much around career aspiration, development, progression, but ultimately the job. At the recruitment stage, we've been developing our partnership with organizations like MZ and Get My First Job. The first is helping us to create a job market analysis profile from a national and regional opportunity perspective, so showing where the work is. And then the second allows an individual to ascertain their personality and behavioral traits and the occupations that maybe would be of most interest or suit them the best. And then by combining the two, we can provide a matching service between personality fit and ambition to that work opportunity. Diagnostics flip the assessment paradigm. So summative assessment attempts to highlight what you know or can do, while diagnostic assessment attempts to highlight what you don't know or can't do. So what we do is we use these tools primarily at the moment in areas like maths and English, where it's important to start to learn at the right level of their journey. But of course, the technique can be used in any domain. Particularly if married with learning technologies, it can be used to tailor a learning program based on deficiencies in understanding or ability, which is a highly efficient way of delivering training. In terms of online training and learning, that was the peripheral mode of delivery before COVID-19. And within weeks, we have seen a seismic shift of the kind that we would have predicted would have taken many, many years. Necessity has brought about this shift, but we believe, and I believe, that the world of work and learning will not be the same post-COVID-19. I mean, I think we all know that. And what was interesting is that one of the things that we did, we immediately made about 28,000 smart screen learning packages available free to centres and learners. But what was fascinating was that we saw our subscription footprint jump from around 10,000 users a month to 60,000 users a month, and that's actually grown since then as well. So a real shift in terms of how learning is being delivered. We pioneered the shift from paper and pencil testing to online sort of several decades ago, and we now provide over 2 million tests per annum. So we were in a pretty good place to respond to the need to provide online access to tests as print and doorstep delivery services, if you like, were switched off. I mean, no longer were we able just to send things in the post because actually there was nobody in centres to get them. So one of the next challenges, therefore, for us was to introduce remote invigilation services alongside our e-testing services as the impact of the lockdown and social distancing took place. So since then, it's seen us roll out our new remote invigilation service to over 200 centres, and it's actually enabled the delivery of thousands and thousands of tests to support apprentices. And we're now progressing to our second phase, which will embed e-testing and online proctoring solutions. I mean, so quite simply, the barriers here are not technology. I don't think there really ever have been. For wider forms of assessment, we have again supported and adopted the concepts of e-portfolio for a long time. This has allowed us to make that transition into capture of digital evidence plus linking to online discussions and observations quite easily. Again, this has now become the dominant mode of delivery, and many providers and employers are saying that they won't go back. For certification, we switched immediately to our e-certification services as printing and delivery of paper certificates became impossible. All of our products can issue results and e-certs online. The next step for us actually is to expand this into a digital credential service, as the credentials offer far more than just an e-certificate in terms of what can be captured and used to demonstrate a learner's capability, skills and knowledge. They can be shared through social and business media networks and link full circle back to the recruitment step as they are matched, with a job opportunity. So what of the future? So where are we going? So to date, e-assessment still hasn't made, I think, a successful penetration into high volume single day testing, such as GCSE and A-levels. And there are various sort of reasons for this. But I think, as I also mentioned earlier, in terms of some of the pilot work, this is in part because the broadband infrastructure or the digital infrastructure still can't handle the huge simultaneous volumes, and because of the technology real estate often seen in schools. However, as things improve, as broadband speeds improve, as networks become more resilient, and access to portable devices gets cheaper, I do believe this is likely to change. Surely it needs to change. Perhaps also we'll question the role of single-day national exams in some of these programs and consider a different blend of technology-enabled learning and assessment as an indicator for progression. So anyway, to enable this to happen, we would need every child to have, access to a laptop or a mobile device in the future to allow them to interact with curriculum learning from multiple locations and to be able to take their tests online. But I do think as technology becomes more affordable, this does start to look more achievable. I do think we will see an increased profile of virtual reality in assessment in more and more ingenious ways in areas such as engineering, where there are safety, accessibility, and cost issues. Cost to access portable devices such as VR headsets have significantly reduced in recent years. So to finish, e-assessment is already an important segment of assessment, and it will only grow in importance in the coming years. The impact of COVID-19 on our industry will absolutely act as a catalyst to make this evolution more relevant and urgent than ever before. In fact, it already has changed so much. There are huge benefits to be reaped in terms of efficiencies, effectiveness, and efficacy. Any organization in the business of assessment that doesn't investigate this thoroughly and embed this technology into its business model will cease to be relevant and be overtaken by its competitors. I was reminded of the quote from Alan Kay, who was head of Xerox innovations at Park in the 70s. He transformed his company's thinking around innovation and competitive edge. And when asked about predictions for the future, he said, "The only way to predict the future is to create it." So now I think we face the challenge and opportunity of creating that new future together in a way that will allow learners, employers, and the economy to emerge with strength and purpose. So that's it from me. So thank you very much for your time this morning. It's been a pleasure to have this opportunity to speak at the e-assessment question conference. And I think now we might have some time for a couple of questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was fascinating. I've been scribbling away furiously as you've been talking, and very much that last point you made in relation to large-scale exams and single-day exams. You're singing to my hymn sheet there. It's one of the things I guess that's frustrated me for a long time about this. And could you just say a little bit more about the fact that it's not necessarily the technology, but it's some other things surrounding the environment?
I guess the first thing for me to say is that one of the things I've sort of been reflecting on is the incredible impact COVID had, and how on many respects it brought so many things to a grinding halt that really didn't need to be brought to a grinding halt. And I do think if as a country, as a sector, maybe if we had been more forward thinking in terms of those technologies that are available to us, then the severity and the impact of bringing an entire GCSE and A-level system to a halt in terms of the ability to be able to take the assessment might not have happened. I mean, I think, what are some of those other things? I mean, I think, some of the things are to do with still sort of unreliable sort of infrastructure. I mean, I do I do think, there are examples of countries where their infrastructures are far more developed and reliable than ours. And, clearly, if we don't have that infrastructure in place, whether it's nationally or within centres or, whatever, then clearly it is going to create some some issues for people. Equally, I guess maybe we as a country have a bit of a mindset shift to take as well in terms of how we perceive these things, and the willingness to be able to shift. I think, but sorry, I'll be quiet in a minute as well. I think the other thing is, I think that my point is as well is that that's why it's so important we do these things as a system. We do them collectively. We've got to think about what those benefits are, and how we go about doing it, because there is little value in one part of a system changing if the other bit don't come with it. So I think we need to think about the regulator. How do we regulate the assessments sort of sector, how we deliver, and so on and so on. So lots of things I think for us to reflect on and think about how we go about changing.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I mean, I've detected a bit of a change. We have here in the EAA had a conversation or two with Ofqual, who have been, looking to see how they can support some of this change now, which is
right,
being very positive, actually.
Right.
There was a comment. I don't know if you read the ETAG report that the government commissioned, which is now 5 years old and growing whiskers. But one of their comments in there, which I rather like, I've written it down: trying nothing new is reckless and dangerous. Would you agree with that?
So trying nothing new is reckless and dangerous. I think. I mean, yes. I mean, I think going back to the that very last quote I said at the end. In terms of predicting the future, you have to create it for yourself. And I think I think that is true for assessment. That is true for everybody. I think it's really, really important that we take the opportunity to try new things. I mean, the only reason that we are able to do some endpoint assessments at the moment in the next couple of months is because we went through a process with IFATE and the EQA organizations to allow remote invigilation to happen, because obviously the problem we've got there, or had there, is that the learner was at home, the invigilator was at their home, and suddenly you can't do it. So after a process, we've got to a point where, and I think for us, we've got 17 endpoint assessments that you can now do with remote invigilation. If COVID hadn't happened, we wouldn't have done that. So now I think what we have to do is think the other way, which is, right, we should have thought of that a year ago or 18 months ago. And it's only because we're trying it now that we're able to create that evidence base that it is a good, robust way of doing things. So I think we have to, and most organizations who learn and sort of take the risk and make some mistakes, of course, you've got to balance the risk, learn, develop, and sort of, progress, don't they?
No, I think that's great. And I think your point about being prepared to take risks and sometimes fail is an important one, because without failing, we don't develop. It just reminds me of that Churchill quote, never let a good crisis go to waste. So,
I think for us, of course, it's assessment. We're assessing people, individuals, their lives are, sort of defined sometimes by these things. So it's just getting that level of risk right, but that willingness to pilot things, try things, that I think is how we will make progress.
No, I quite agree with that. Having run that sort of thing myself, I know what happens if it goes wrong in the real world. However, we do have one of our favorite EAA members and presenters, Jeff Chapman, who's got a question for you. A number of non-UK high-stakes e-assessments deliver millions of tests over single days, e.g. India, New Zealand and Iceland school exams delivered online. Why can they do it and the UK can't? So, Jeff, thanks for that googly in there. Great question. And it's got a shout out from John Kleeman as well. So answer in 30 seconds, David, maybe?
Well, I think it goes back to a number of... Oh, sorry. Am I...
No. I'm only kidding you.
No, that's fine. I think it goes back to some of the things I just talked about now. I think there is a national mindset around these things that we need to shift. I think there are technology issues. I don't think people feel confident in the robustness of the infrastructure of the system. I think we need to invest more in actually creating and piloting assessments for online delivery, because it's obviously not just a straightforward matter of taking an assessment that was used to be on paper and just putting it online. So, I think we just have I'm probably going to get myself into trouble now, but sometimes, we have this with academic versus vocational and the lack of parity between the two, which is nonsensical in my mind. And I think we just need to be bolder with what we're prepared to test and what we're to do. So technology, let's get the broadband infrastructure up to scratch, the broader, let's invest more in sort of assessments that can be delivered online. And I think, again, for me, we need to just have some sort of campaign for the whole system. So, because the whole system has to come along, together, because there's no point in trying to force it on people if they don't believe and understand the benefits.
That's brilliant. I think that's probably a good time for us to move on, actually. And I want to thank you, David, for what I think was a really interesting rehearsal of some of the history. I was there at the time when Key Stage 3 ICT was being developed by my good friend Martin Ripley, and I shared the office next to him as he gradually spent vast amounts of money on that. That's a shame that never came off, actually. So thank you ever so much, and we'll move on now to our next speaker. So we have up next Paul Crump. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Graham.
Paul is Assessment Group Manager of Cambridge Assessment Admissions Testing. Paul, I don't know whether it's possible with your camera just to lower your lens a little.
Oh, yes, certainly,
so
yeah.
We can see all of you as opposed to...
Yeah, is that better?
Just up a touch. That's lovely.
There?
Yeah, you're right on screen there. So
marvellous.
So Paul's going to talk to us about remote proctoring and the future of invigilation-free assessment. As I said earlier on, I've had a lot of people talking to me about this and how it works, what's the best way of doing it, and so on. So I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Graham. And I'd just like to start by saying thank you very much for inviting me along to speak today. And just also to add my thanks to David's, really, to the organisers of this great conference for organising such a great programme of online talks for us. And as David said, really having the tenacity to go through with this in the face of the pandemic and really put together a great programme of online talks and events and giving us all this forum as well to discuss and share our experience. So with that said, good morning to everybody, or good afternoon or good evening if you're outside of the UK. I am going to be talking about the hot topic of remote proctoring this morning. And I'm going to start by giving you a brief overview of what remote proctoring is. Many of you, I imagine, will already be very familiar with it. I'm then going to move on to present a couple of case studies of how we in Cambridge Assessment Admissions Testing have used remote proctoring recently with two of our exams, one called TSA, the Thinking Skills Assessment, and also STEP, which is sixth term examination paper, which is one of our high-level maths exams. And then I'll sort of finish up with a brief discussion of the benefits of remote proctoring and some of the issues that it raises as well from our perspective. And hopefully there'll be time at the end as well for some questions. Just a couple of caveats before I start. One is to say that I'm not here this morning to extol the virtues of remote proctoring. I don't represent any remote proctoring provider, and my expertise is really in assessment content production. The other caveat is that I don't have any particular technical expertise in remote proctoring. Really, what I'm trying to do today is outline, as I said, a couple of case studies and share our experience, our recent experience of what some of the benefits and some of the issues with remote proctoring can be. So that being said, what is remote proctoring? As I'm sure you're all aware, remote proctoring or remote invigilation is a service that emulates the role of an on-site proctor or invigilator, and it confirms the identity of the test taker and helps to safeguard the integrity of the exam or assessment when it's taken online and remotely. And although remote proctoring has been a hot topic in recent months during the pandemic, it's not particularly new. There are lots of different RP providers in the marketplace, and remote proctoring has been going at least for 10 years and has been developing and gathering pace over that time. Here are some of the companies that are currently providing remote proctor services. In admissions testing, we have worked with Question Mark, and I think John Kleeman might be in the audience for this. Hi, John. We've also worked with Mercer Metal, and I'll be talking in a little bit more detail about that collaboration in subsequent slides. So there are many different types of remote proctoring and many different types of remote proctoring service, and the type that is best for any particular organization or assessment will depend obviously on a number of factors. And one of the main factors will be how high or low stakes the particular assessment in question is. The main kind of functions or services that remote proctoring can provide are listed there on the left-hand side of my screen. There is verification of identity using AI and using data matching or a human invigilator to check that the candidates are who they say they are. And that's usually done by candidates presenting photo ID to a webcam for it to be verified. There's also auto-monitored or AI-based proctoring, and this has two main aspects, if you like. There's data matching, where a candidate's data is matched against flags from previous remote proctored sessions. And then there is facial and device and body detection recognition software. And this is where technology is used to flag if there is, for example, someone else in the room, if the candidate has left his or her screen, if the candidate has an extra or additional device in the room, such as a mobile phone or an iPad, and whether or not the candidate is sharing his or her screen with someone other than the proctoring service. And that sort of auto-monitored or AI-based proctoring is best used, I think, in low to medium stakes contexts. And then there's also live human proctoring, which is usually used alongside AI proctoring to monitor candidates in real time as they're taking the assessment. So this is where there are live human proctors who have access to webcams and to the candidate's screens, so they can see both the room in which the candidate is sitting and his or her screen as well. The ratio of invigilators to candidates typically ranges from 1 to 5 to 1 to 20, depending on the stakes involved in the examination. And the other function as well of live human proctoring is that it allows candidates to interact with the human proctor as well, so that if they're experiencing any technical issues or they have any problems, they can get immediate help and support from an online proctor. Invigilation, it's important to say, is only through the portal. So invigilators will not have any other way of contacting or accessing the computer other than, the candidate, other than through the portal itself. And so this type of remote proctoring allows for recording of candidates taking the test so that that can be reviewed later. And in the case of the live human proctoring as well, it also allows for live intervention. So that's a sort of overview of what remote proctoring is and the different types of remote proctoring. I'll now move on to talk about our experience with two particular case studies. But before I do that, I'll just give a little bit of background about the unit that I work in within Cambridge Assessment, just so that you have an idea of the context in which we operate. We are admissions testing, and we create and deliver high-stakes admissions tests. These are tests that are used alongside GCSEs, A-levels, and other school-based examinations to provide additional information about candidates at the time of application to university. A range of institutions use our tests, including Oxford, Cambridge, other Russell Group universities in the UK, as well as a range of institutions internationally. We're mainly focused on entry into undergraduate higher education, and this is onto a range of courses, quite varied range of courses actually, including medicine, engineering, maths, science, and economics. And the recent experience that we've had with remote proctoring has been with two of our tests, our Thinking Skills Assessment, or TSA, and STEP, which is a high-level maths test used for entry to Cambridge, as well as a number of other universities, both of which have got a widespread international candidature. So a little background there, as I said. So I'll move on to talk about our experience of remote proctoring with our TSA exam. So we were approached by a university in India, the University of Ashoka, who are, I should say, a liberal arts university with a large, widespread candidature across India and internationally as well, many of whom live in rural parts of India where it's difficult for them to gain access to a physical exam centre. And they wanted to use our computer-based thinking skills assessment for applicants to a range of their courses. And they had 2,800 candidates from around 26 different countries. And we administered computer-based TSA to over 1,000 of those candidates using Mercer Metal remote invigilation. So we partnered with Metal to deliver this test through their lockdown remote proctored platform. And the screen that you can see, the slide rather, that you can see on screen here just gives an overview really of some of the functions of that remote proctoring system that we used. As I mentioned a few slides back, one of the main or initial uses of RP was for authentication, where candidates enter their registration details and upload ID proof of themselves. We also used auto-proctoring with AI flags using facial recognition, device detection, body detection. We were able to record and review the candidate's test-taking experience, which allowed for validation of AI flags and allowed us to understand and review the severity of each flag and then weed out any suspicious cases for further malpractice identification. We also used live proctoring, given that this was a fairly high-stakes test, which allowed for pausing of the test and chatting with the candidate in real time, and in extreme cases, ending the test. And this was all delivered through a secure browser. So there were no background software allowed, no screen recording by the candidate, no ability to share the screen except with the live proctor. But it also allowed us to give them access to relevant software and to allow formula books and so on for examinations where that's required. And Metal report 95% accuracy in predicting cheating, and this slide shows an overview of really how their system works, from the online assessment taken by the candidate and the video feed, audio feed, and screen feed to their AI-based proctoring system, which will flag violations and will build something that they call the credibility index. So this is an index that is compiled on a candidate as he or she takes a number of different assessments to build up a picture of whether this is a candidate that is kind of at risk, if you like, of attempted malpractice in the future. And at the bottom of this slide, you can see examples of some violations that have been detected. So where there's an additional person in the room, where the candidate has disappeared, or where the candidate suspiciously is not visible and he or she may be potentially looking away. I should also say that the live proctor can ask candidates to give a 360 view of the room they're in, can ask them to show on their camera their desk and so on, to check that there is nothing untoward there in terms of notes or additional information which is not allowed as part of the exam. This builds up a credibility index and also produces a proctoring report, and on that report can be listed any suspicious incidents, and that is all compiled and sent to the using institution that is administering the test and using the test for application purposes. So that's an overview really of how Metal's system works. And this next screen just shows you the proctor view and the proctor controls. So here you can see the applicant's details, name, location, contact information. There are automatically generated invigilation warnings based on the applicant's behavior, on image and audio processing. There's an audit trail. There's the ability for the invigilator to stop the test, to interact with the candidate, and toggle to see the applicant's screen as well as the applicant's face. And admin can play back through the applicant's recording once the test has finished. And since we partnered with Metal to deliver TSA using remote proctoring for them, we've gone on to do some more work in this area using remote proctoring with approximately 1,600 further thinking skills assessments in May 2020. We've also administered TSA with a Petronas Scholarship Programme. This is University of Petronas based in Kuala Lumpur, who have been using TSA for their engineering scholarships. And also we work with the School of Economics at Stockholm University for their undergraduate admissions round in recent months. And the picture that you can see on the right of that slide is just an example of a thinking skills question online. So that's TSA. I'll move on to talk about another, in a way, slightly more challenging experience that we've had recently with remote proctoring, and that's with our STEP exam. So STEP, as I mentioned earlier, stands for Sixth Term Examination Paper. It's a test that's taken usually around the same time as A-levels in May or June in the UK, but also internationally. And it's a very high-level maths paper used for entry onto mathematics courses mainly. There were a number of issues with delivering STEP online and delivering it remotely proctored that we didn't face with TSA. Unlike TSA, STEP is not a multiple choice assessment, and it requires candidates to show extensive workings using complex mathematical notation. And for that reason, really, we've never offered it previously in a computer-based format. It's only been offered in a paper-based format. And due to the pandemic, we needed a fast, secure solution in order to deliver this test in June this year. It's also a very high stakes test, so it was very important that security was paramount in any solution that we came up with. So the solution that we came up with, again partnering with Metal, was to produce a computer-based version of the test, but to allow candidates to write their responses on an answer sheet and to upload and scan that answer sheet to our secure portal. This was really because, as I mentioned, actually being able to develop in the time we had available a system that would allow them to answer the questions on screen was very, very difficult. And actually, this system worked really well. We were able to administer the test to, I think, in the region of 2,000 candidates. And this here on screen just gives you a quick view of some of the scanned answers that were sent in by candidates who took the test using this system. So this brings us on to the last section of my presentation, which is about benefits and issues to consider. So I think David's touched on some of the issues here earlier as well in his presentation, certainly in terms of some of the issues. But I think the benefits of remote proctoring are fairly self-explanatory, fairly self-evident. One is access. In admissions testing, we are very concerned about widening participation and about giving access to the maximum number of students to take our examinations. And so remote proctoring is great for those contexts, such as the one that Ashoka were facing, where many candidates will struggle to travel to an examination centre, and that can be a barrier to application. Just the cost and the logistics involved in that can be a real barrier. There's also the logistics in terms of removing that headache of setting up and running large examination centres, particularly in terms of computer-based assessment, in terms of having the IT infrastructure and the bandwidth to deliver very large-scale examinations on site. This is a much better solution. It's obviously allowed us to flex in the current pandemic and allowed us to be very agile in responding to that and putting on a session at quite short notice. And I do think there are real benefits in terms of security. It's a very efficient way of verifying candidate identity. It can provide a more secure examination delivery experience, and it allows for closer scrutiny of individuals as required. So lots of benefits, I think, but also some issues to consider. Access, I think, is a double-edged sword. One of the issues with access is that it does present issues for candidates who have poor Wi-Fi coverage or who don't perhaps have access to adequate computer facilities. There can still be issues around technical failure, which can be a real problem for high-stakes examinations in terms of outages, systems failures, etc. Fortunately, we've not experienced any major issues in this area in our recent experience of using remote proctoring, but this is clearly still a risk. I think we have to acknowledge that there are affective factors as well, that some candidates may find remote proctoring can add to the stress of taking an assessment. And finally, some people have raised, I think, legitimate concerns around privacy and data collection issues with remote proctoring. So that really brings me up to the end of my presentation. So thank you again very much for listening. And I think hopefully, Graham, we've got time for some questions.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that. That was really very interesting and very helpful. And I like the way that you'd sort of summarized the whole thing, and some of your slides showing what the various mechanisms for doing the remote proctoring are. And the case studies, I think, would be really helpful to people watching this, just seeing how that can be implemented in practice. So thank you ever so much for that. You asked about, you mentioned in your last slide about invasion of candidates' privacy.
Yeah.
There have been some legal cases in the Netherlands about this, which ruled on the side that it was legitimate to use remote proctoring, although I think it was caveated that because there was no other way to do it in the current circumstances. Could you just say a little bit more about that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously, I think some of those concerns are very much legitimate. I think it's incumbent upon remote proctoring providers to do everything they can to ensure that candidate data is used carefully, is used responsibly, is used only for the legitimate purpose of monitoring them while they take the actual assessment, and that data is not held on to at all. But at the same time, I think, as you said, in the current climate, certainly there is little alternative in many cases to remote proctoring if we want these high stakes assessments to go ahead, and if we want candidates to have an opportunity to take these assessments. So I think it's probably something that has to be managed carefully, but I do think that remote proctoring is a useful and important solution, particularly at the moment.
No, I'd agree with you. And I think it's partly that change management aspect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ensuring people understand what it's about, how it's used, how data is going to be used, and so on.
Yeah.
You only give out partial information, people are going to get concerned, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, candidates needs to be made very, very clear to candidates why their data is being collected, how it will be used, and obviously they need to consent to that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. A couple of questions here that have come in. Chris Hall has said, have you been able to accommodate different reasonable adjustment requests? For example, if a scribe is required, how have you dealt with this?
That's a very good question. I think access, managing the remote proctoring while providing, those very important access requests is something that we have been looking into. We have managed to do it. So we have, I believe, cases where candidates have had a scribe in the room with them taking the exam, and that has been allowed, and the particular invigilator has kind of agreed to that, and the person has been there with them, and they've been able to sort of verify that by looking at the screen and by looking at the room, that they are only doing what they are meant to be doing, which is acting as a scribe and entering the information for candidates rather than giving any other illicit help.
No, quite. So yeah, that's great. Chris has asked another question here. Well done, Chris, for pitching two into the pot. Is it correct that if additional time, larger font size, or different color backgrounds, these can be accommodated?
Yes. So yes, that's fine. I mean, as part of all of our online assessments, we have that functionality built in, and there's no difference there for a remote proctored exam. We would still be able to offer that.
Wow, thank you. And the question that I get asked sometimes is, if you're starting down this route as an organization, maybe an organization doing similar things to you with locations around the world, where do people actually start to look for a remote proctoring solution? What would you say is maybe the one or two things that they should immediately take into account?
I think it really depends on your context. I think, for us, we're very high stakes in what we do. So we were looking for a provider that could really assure us that they could deliver reliably at large volumes, and also give us that sort of security, that level of security that we needed. So that was paramount for us. So I think I'd say, be very clear about what you're looking for in terms of international spread, the stakes of your assessment. Be very clear about what you want from that provider, and then look at what's available with that in mind. There are other contexts where the stakes might be lower, and it might not be necessary to have a live proctor. It might be fine to use some sort of just an AI based engine. The other thing is looking at the international spread of your candidature and the volume, as I said, as well, in terms of how many people you will want to be taking this exam at one time.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you very much for that. Helen Burden asks us, have you had any issues with large-scale hacking attacks like Pearson's had in the Egypt project?
Fortunately not, no, and that sends a shudder down my spine, Graham. No, we haven't. But that's another thing, isn't it, to add to that list of risks and issues, really, that hackers, I'm sure, are becoming ever more sophisticated in their ability to target examinations. So it's something we need to be, very aware of. We fortunately have not had those issues so far, touch wood.
Brilliant. Okay, well, look, Paul, thank you ever so much. We're going to bring you in at the end with David.
Sure.
So there may be some more questions to ask there. Sorry, my camera seems to have gone a bit fuzzy. Let me put that right. Thank you. We're now going to attempt a segue, which we had not anticipated 2 hours ago, which was to bring in Paul Muir, but virtually. The technical boffins have been beavering away behind the scenes and have taken a podcast that we recorded with Paul and Gareth a little bit earlier in the year. We've edited this down to about 20 minutes, and we're going to play that to you now. And we're very pleased that a couple of Paul's colleagues have agreed to join us for the Q&A session. So we have to thank British Council for moving very quickly to support us on that. So fingers crossed that the technical boffins have been successful.
Hello, and welcome to this podcast from the E-Assessment Association's series of COVID-19 podcasts. My name is Gareth Hopkins. I'm an E-Assessment specialist at City and Guilds and member of the E-Assessment Board. And I'm joined by two people from the British Council, Steve Adams and Paul Muir. Would you like to introduce yourselves and tell everyone what your roles are at the British Council?
Great, more than happy.
Steve.
Yeah, so I'm Steve Adams. I'm Director of Examination Services for East Asia. So that covers all of our exams products and all of our exam service and activities across the East Asia region, including China. So over from Myanmar down to New Zealand and up to Korea, up to Mongolia, in fact, actually. And I'm based in Beijing.
And Paul?
And yeah, hi, I'm Paul Muir. I'm head of computer-based testing at the British Council, based out of London, but responsible globally for our computer-based testing strategy and delivery.
Excellent. So obviously we're here to talk about COVID-19 and sort of responses to it. How did events develop in China in relation to COVID-19, and how did it affect assessment and how did it affect assessment delivery? Steve, we'll start with you since you were closest to it.
Sure. I thought you were going to ask me this question, so I did a little bit of digging today to sort of dig out some of the old emails. It all seems so long ago. And actually, it was around the middle of January, which isn't actually all that long ago, when we started receiving emails about something going on in Wuhan, a virus in Wuhan and the possibility of cancelling some IELTS sessions in Wuhan, and some growing concern there. And very, very quickly indeed, it escalated to be a long-term postponement of IELTS across China. And that soon became a change in the FCO's travel advice, which sparked assisted departure for many of our examiners. And by that point, at which I think the entire team were probably working 14, 16-hour days, 7 days a week, it was an operation in terms of exam volumes. This was obviously huge news for the British Council. And as things then developed from there, I mean, the out-and-out cancellation of everything was absolutely gutting. But then we started to focus on recovery. And I think at the beginning we were thinking, well, okay, we'll see this through. We'll see this through the rest of January. February is not looking too great, is it? With any luck, we'll be back up and running in March. All of our operations, with any luck, we'll be back up and running in March. All of our operations around the edge of China in the rest of East Asia, they were starting to increase their measures, but ultimately we thought it'll all settle down, and it soon became very apparent that it wouldn't. And even now, testing remains closed. Most testing remains closed in China, and our focus is very much on getting things up and running again. The good news, of course, is that in the rest of East Asia, most of our operations are up and running again.
That's brilliant news. And so, Paul, I guess China was an early indicator that something was going on, how did the rest of the world react to it?
I think it's, as with everything with COVID-19, I think also we've seen what happened in China, and also the great work that our China team did and the East Asian team did in responding to that, and it sort of affected the things we've all seen. So, you know, a lot of our exams around the world, we have big exam sessions or big exam sessions that happen in March for a number of clients on a very, very large scale, and most of those in East Asia were cancelled, and as it's rolled out going towards even June sessions, May and June sessions, we're starting to see obviously all of those being cancelled, and most awarding bodies pushing their exams into later in the year, or we're responding by putting on sort of special sessions for them in months where they wouldn't normally test, to try and pick up some of those candidates to allow people still to test. So I think, as everyone has seen, that it's just moved across the world, and we've responded as best we can, but with all times putting the student safety and our staff safety as the number one priority. So even though I think from the outside sometimes a country or a region may look open to people, I think from the outside sometimes a country or a region may look open to people, I think the fact that the British Council has these people on the ground, has the boots on the ground, has that local knowledge, has meant we've been able to help our clients open up somewhere where they may not have expected to, but also to the other extreme, actually, we've had to potentially close some things down that we wouldn't necessarily want to do under normal circumstances. So it's been a journey. It's been lots of long hours, and I think as everyone has been doing this from home as well, it's been a bit more of a challenge for us all. But I think all of our teams around the world have performed brilliantly to put exams on as soon as we can.
Yeah. So this is probably my ignorance. What form do your exams usually take? Are they paper-based or computer-based?
We have a mixture. I think it's fair to say, and I'm sure Steve would agree, predominantly we're still, I would have said, how you make that move successfully, both from a technology perspective, from a process perspective, what it means for your assessments, what it means for your students. But predominantly we are still paper-based, and obviously and that's case test centre dominant in how we deliver our exams. So with COVID-19 stopping people gathering, that's obviously a challenge for us, and one we're continuing to explore how we can offer an alternative to students in this period.
Yeah.
I'd probably say that oh, sorry. Yeah,
no, go
I'd
on.
probably say that that's very true by volume, actually. But if you actually look at the products, with a mixture out there, I mean, some of our products are exclusively computer-based. I mean, Aptis which is a British Council-owned English test. I mean, that was designed to be computer-based, and the paper version only came later in response to client demand. We have an app-based test called English Score. That's purely mobile enabled. And we even have a new product out in the market with the IELTS partners called IELTS Smart Learn. That's not only mobile enabled, it's actually AI driven. So some of our products are very much digital first, although I think in the world of IELTS, paper-based is still king, but in some markets, you know, especially in the East Asia region now, the preference is very much for computer-based tests, and we're moving into that area a lot more now. I think what's probably changed recently, though, is that the demand for the move from computer-based to home-based testing is really picking up, and there's a lot more interest, if you like, around the area of proctoring, remote proctoring.
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, the biggest barrier to remote proctoring before COVID-19 and everyone responding to it was trust in it. Steve, have you seen a change in people's opinion of how much they trust remote proctoring?
I've seen a lot of stuff out there. I mean, basically, because things have come so quickly. I mean, what we've really seen is that through COVID, the demand for education, which to some extent people are now holding back and waiting to see a little bit. But at the beginning, people were very, very keen to continue with education, but weren't able to attend tests face to face. So obviously, the demand for remotely proctored services increased. So whereas normally back in the pre-COVID world, we'd have had chance to roll things out carefully with lots of testing, we've seen that this vacuum that was created by COVID has both led to vast amounts of innovation. Certainly in our organisation, and I'm sure in other organisations too, but also a lot of rollout of things very, very quickly. So we've seen remotely proctored tests being rolled out. We've seen plans for remotely proctored tests being made but not being fulfilled in some cases because, you know, not everything is as straightforward as maybe we first hoped. And we've seen to some extent reactions about these tests and some, you know, certain amounts of distrust in some cases from governments, in some cases from receiving organisations. And I think it really is an emerging technology and an emerging approach to testing, and it has yet to find its place. And I think testing providers as well as test result users and boards don't really positive, and I think that direction of travel is absolutely irreversible now. But there will be certain bumps along the way, and I think questions around cheating and security are certainly going to be coming up far more frequently as we launch and learn, as it were.
Yeah, definitely. Paul, is that something you're finding on a sort of a wider?
I think it is. We're seeing. I think with remote proctoring, I think it's much more mature in the USA, for example, with maybe some of the lower to medium stakes exams. I think a lot of what the British Council does is very high stakes exams, used for immigration purposes, such as IELTS, as Steve's already touched on. MBA courses, accountancy exams, things like this, and I think they've always looked at it with suspicion, I think, as you touched on as well. And I think what it's seen is people reassess risk. I think remote proctoring is a different model. I think the more you keep trying to compare it to a test centre, I think it can be quite dangerous. You'll start looking for flaws, start saying, oh, that isn't the same as that, so it's not as good. And actually, I think what you need to look at is, and what we've looked at as a British Council is, what can it give you that's different? We have, I think, a client base that would still say test centres is their number one. Test centres is their preferred model of delivery, but everyone within COVID-19 has to reassess that and said, actually, if we want our students to test, to continue to be able to, have an education and improve their skills and abilities, we need to find a way of doing it. So we are seeing people who we probably would have thought would be one of the last adopters of remote proctoring actually saying, no, we need to do this. And so we are seeing that, and I think it's that assurance needed on security and a bit more time spent with clients, I think, talking through some of the extra security features that remote proctoring gives you over and above what a test center would give you. So yes, you're over and above what a test center would give you. So yes, you're losing that test center room, with one or two proctors, with two proctors that we would normally see. But what you're gaining is lots of AI. You're gaining a much lower ratio of proctoring, from invigilator to student. So there's definitely, I think there's a perception of flaws, but I think it's something that we're finding is easier to overcome now. I think when people are obviously up against it as well, to put something on. But I think it certainly has a place in our longer term future. It's not just a pandemic response. It's always been seen within the British Council as it has a place in our future going forwards.
Are there any sort of cultural considerations, Steve, in security of tests? Is it something you're aware of?
Yeah, I think there are actually. Exactly how these different dimensions of culture will feed through into the view. But I think one cultural aspect is that in East Asia people are very innovative. So there is a drive to be, early adopters and take things up. So there is a desire for new things and new approaches. But on the other hand, as we all know, the approach to education in many cases is quite formal, and the approach to examinations is quite formal. So the idea that it has to be formal, it has to be strict, it has to be fair, it has to be controlled, in many ways has driven a lot of the culture around education. I don't want to stereotype, but we do know that, there is a leaning towards sort of rote learning and very formal memorization, which is then tested formally in an exam. So that would lead me to believe that there will be certain suspicion around tests that are remotely proctored. Around tests that are remotely proctored. People will just assume that the candidates will cheat, or they may do. So I think it may take some time for these very conservative, if you like, these very conservative organizations and schools and bodies to accept that remotely proctored tests are as reliable and as good a way forward as any other form. And I think once that happens, I think the nature of education will change. People will start to think, well, why do I have to go and leave my home to get an education? Why do I have to leave my home to take my test? I think after COVID, people have realized you can do an awful lot more from home than they probably thought was possible. So once we get that cultural acceptance, you mix in the early adopter thinking, plus, the change of habits that have arisen from COVID and so on.
The e-assessment question conference has gone virtual. Starting on June 23rd, we'll have 3 weeks of amazing content, all centered around e-assessment. Week 1, future gazing and innovation. Week 2, assessment and practical implementation. And week 3, technology, higher education and regulation. So make sure you don't miss out. Go to e-assessment-question.com for more information. Now back to Gareth.
Yeah, and I think what's going to be most interesting about those reports is that we can only second guess so many of them, because there's so many things which, as you said, there's lots of work being done in the US already around this, but that's mostly in universities. So it'd be interesting how different sectors of our customer bases react to it. You mentioned about, Steve, people educating at home. What sort of things does the British Council offer in terms of that?
In terms of studying at home? Well, it's a very interesting question, actually, because the biggest thing that we do in terms of actual direct teaching in the British Council is English teaching, which you probably know. So, of course, with COVID, all of our face-to-face teaching had to stop in most places, and ideas that have been bubbling away on the back burners for quite a while, plans that were being developed at a particular pace, suddenly had to accelerate very quickly and in a very short period of time. In fact, over a matter of just a few weeks, most of our face-to-face students convert a few weeks. Most of our face-to-face students converted very quickly to online learning. It was incredible. It's something that we planned a long time ago and had hoped, I think, for a long time to be able to introduce gradually and bring people over. But because of COVID, it all happened, I think, much faster than any of us had hoped, which is great. And of course, we'll keep that experience. And I don't think we'll ever move back entirely to face-to-face teaching. And there will always be a strong, I think, digital element to what we do from now on. So
did that take the form of a sort of conference call style things with teachers, or was it exercises delivered?
This is not my area of expertise. I can't give you the details because I work in exam and teaching. All I can say with any confidence is that it's very, very good.
And Paul, is there anything that you're aware of? So this is just me being interested.
So my expertise is exams as well, but I think what I'd say is I think a lot of what we're finding now is I think we work with a lot of young students. Most of our cohort is probably under 20. I will say we have professional exams, but we have a lot of people who with school exams, with IELTS, with APTIS, who will be younger. And I think we're seeing now is the take up of things like remote probably is actually quite natural to them. And I think we've got a lot of people making decisions, and a lot of people who've maybe made decisions who are maybe not necessarily that tech savvy themselves. I think are very sort of wedded to traditional methods of teaching and/or examination delivery. And I think actually the clientele we're probably working towards, the end user actually is probably quite open to this. What we've got to do is win over lots of people working towards the end user actually is probably quite open to this. What we've got to do is win over lots of people in organisations and awarding bodies. I think obviously you said you work for City and Guilds. I used to have an awarding body background as well. I know what those places are like, and I know how much it can take to move people's mindset to a new way of working, a new way of thinking around assessment. So I think we should never forget that the end user in all this, and actually they're quite open to all this, and not because they think it's easy to cheat or anything like that, but actually because this is actually natural to them. And working in this way is something that we are going to, I think as Steve has said, we're going to continue to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Where could people find out more about the British Council's work if they would like to after this podcast?
On the British Council's website, www.britishcouncil.org. And I think that will give you all the information you need to know. Of course, we work far more broadly than just exams and English. We work in the arts as well, and in education and society. So we have a very broad portfolio of offers around the world, and we hope that people find that interesting.
Thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thanks ever so much for setting that up, the team, and I hope you found that interview of interest. We do send our best wishes to Paul. We understand that he's not really at all well. He's getting the medical attention that he needs, and I'm sure that you would all want to send your good wishes on to him. But I'm now able to welcome two of his colleagues, Eunice McAllister and Saima Satti, from the British Council. And thank you ever so much for joining us this morning. Do you want to just give us a half a sentence on what you do, Eunice?
Yes, so I work in the client relations team in the part of the business that we call exam distribution, where we work with third-party clients, awarding organisations and school boards to manage and deliver their exams all around the world, up to 130 different countries, 700 different locations. So that's my role to work with those clients and to bring on new clients in pen and paper and increasingly computer-based delivery.
Thanks very much, Eunice. And Saima, what do you do?
Hi, my name's Saima. I work in the exams unit like Eunice. I'm head of business improvement, which is really looking at exactly some of the things we're talking about today, on how we respond to changes in business models, technology, solutions, iterative enhancements of processes to ensure that we're delivering the needs of our client in the best way possible to the end user.
Thanks very much. So very interesting listening to the discussion between your two colleagues there on the podcast. Is there anything that you could say of the one thing that you've learned in recent times during this during these turbulent times that would be a standout lesson for you and perhaps would be of benefit to others? Who wants to answer that?
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned is our capability to innovate. And I think that, you know, the oldest one, mother is invention is the, well, I forgot the saying. Anyways, but how the situation around us changing so drastically and at such an unprecedented pace has actually resulted in an unprecedented pace of innovation, thinking outside the box, adapting and learning to new ways of working and solutions, but not at the expense of quality and integrity that we, you know, as organizations in this arena are known for. So it's that very fine balance between maintaining the integrity but moving at a much faster pace. And I think it's quite a motivating yet challenging and invigorating space for everybody involved.
Yeah, thanks. And I think we've heard echoes of that, haven't we, about pace of change and the time that we're in really driving us down that in a way that perhaps we hadn't first envisaged. So a question from Matt Wingfield here. Do you think that the political momentum behind using remote assessment in these international markets will continue post-COVID at the same pace? Or do you think other priorities will take over? Eunice, what do you think about that?
I think the momentum, as was said, as Paul stated in the podcast, the momentum is now unstoppable. It always was part of British Council's strategy to introduce remote proctoring as part of our service offering to complement what clients were already delivering, perhaps to cover off those locations that are harder to the smaller volume locations, where it's not so viable or so cost effective to bring enough candidates together to carry out a high stakes exam on a face-to-face basis. So it always was part of the strategy, but as Saima just said there, everything's been accelerated. So we're now actually delivering remote proctored exams for clients, and we're putting together partnerships and solutions to be able to do that in different ways. As was mentioned in the previous speaker, you've got different stakes and different solutions for different stakes of exams. You've got record and review, record as well as live proctored. So we're putting in place the ability to offer live with lots of, supported by 25 plus different types of artificial intelligence to support the live proctor, as well as the record and review, whereby it's all AI managed. And what we're seeing is that that demand is not going to go away. The test centre will, I think for many of them, test centre is still depends on how high stakes exams are and how high volume they are as well, because we're delivering hundreds of thousands. We're delivering sessions that are 60,000, 80,000 plus. So to be able to do that all at one time, live proctored, is a huge challenge. So clients are looking at hybrid solutions.
Yeah.
And obviously with COVID-19, many test centres, there's social distancing measures in place now as well, which perhaps makes it not so viable, not so cost effective. So remote proctoring comes into its own there as well. So it's about what is manageable going forward and offering both, so that what works best in different markets depending on different volumes.
Thank you for that. I think just one more question, then we'll move to open this up a bit to the other presenters. It's a slightly left field question here from Jeff Chapman. So the university has Open to the World report is critical of the Council's English testing. With impending structural reforms, should exam owners expect the Council to change its test centre service? I'm not sure whether you've got a comment on that or not, either of you.
Can you rephrase that? Sorry, I'm not actually sure what the question is.
So I think this is looking at exam owners expecting a different approach from the British Council in terms of its test centre service. Do you feel in a position to respond to that?
Certainly IELTS is a different area of British Council that I wouldn't really be able to comment on.
Could I comment slightly? I think maybe not fully, but I'd like to comment on, I think, 2 points there. I think the test centre service, as Paul and Steve highlighted, I mean, there's a couple of things. There's direction of travel in the various markets. There's also the whole aspect around cultural change in markets and how people perceive testing, how that will happen. And then there's, of course, client preference, which in some cases is still test centre first. So I think the British Council is definitely going to be responding to the needs of the client within an understanding of the cultural context of the various markets that we are very closely operating in. So I think it's got to be a response that works for the client and the student and the test taker, ultimately achieving the objective of what the candidate or the test taker is looking for. We're exploring all sorts of options of choice.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Simon. That was a really great answer. Thank you very much. So I'm now going to bring back in David and Paul. And really just to say, first of all, thank you very much for the presentations that you gave. So that's great. And see if there are any other questions which have come in on the stream. There's a question from Nick Skelton. Not sure who might want to pick this up, but maybe one or more of you would like to. Did you get cases of cheating or borderline cases where cheating was suspected? I suspect that's focused on you, Paul.
Yes. So I believe that we did have some flags of malpractice, as we call it, in some of our exams. Not many, but we typically do get a small number of candidates where there are exceptions flagged, where there may be things that we need to investigate. And we have quite a sort of detailed and well-documented malpractice process for dealing with those cases, and we convene a review panel and so on, and we report back to our end user, the institution who's using the test. So I wasn't part of those actual panels for this test, but I would anticipate that that there would have been for both STEP and for TSA, the two exams I talked about, yes, a small number of malpractice cases that required further investigation.
Thank you. Would anybody else on the panel like to comment on that? Because I think you've all been, operating this territory, haven't you?
The only comment I can make is that I'm not close enough or aware of any, unfortunately. Well, not unfortunately, but so nothing constructive to add, I'm afraid. But no, not aware of any just yet. But I think so far we haven't done it to the same scale. I think that we've heard about in other places. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yeah.
I think I was just going to add scale. Scale is the right point there. Obviously, where we have tried a new product of choice, for example, IELTS indicator, in certain areas, we have seen more than cheating plagiarism. So obviously, we are, like Nick highlighted, there's very robust malpractice processes, particularly the IELTS space, that are working with Cambridge English and our partner IDP. So there's mechanisms there in place to monitor, to report, to take action thereafter with said candidates. But I think integrity is key to any test-taking event, be it sort of, in the high stakes or even the medium stakes, because that validity is very important. So yes, mechanisms that are process-based, but also exploring technological solutions to detect cheating.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And there was a question that popped up about, where the drivers are in this whole environment. We've talked a lot about delivery in terms of e-assessment and the testing. Sometimes I get the feeling that maybe the student's point of view isn't potentially taken into account when we're putting these things together. Do you get that feeling, or would you disagree with me?
I mean, I think if I've understood the question, I think there is absolutely more that that can be sort of thought about in terms of the students. I mean, when the sort of, we've been working on remote invigilation, and then we're going to move to remote proctoring as our sort of long-term sort of solution. And one of the things that we've been quite careful to do is to sort of test it with potential learners as well, just to make sure that we're understanding it both from the business perspective of the centre that we happen to be working with, but also from their apprentices or also learners. I mean, I think the other thing that we have to sort of always think about is the environment that a learner might be taking a test in. So it's not just about being able to do an e-assessment or invigilate from home, or you've got to be sure that actually the learner is in a place where they can be assessed fairly, so no distractions, appropriate, things like that. The temperature is correct, they feel comfortable, and they won't be disturbed, and so on and so on. So I'm not, if that's a response to the question anyway.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you for that, David. There's just one more, I think, and then we'll wind up, and I'll say my thanks. This is from Andrew Harland, who, as you know, was previously the director of the Exams Officers Association. Have the days of protectionism ended and hiding behind issues over security and the risk associated with high stakes? The door has now been opened and can never be closed again across the world. So I think the question is, have the days of protectionism ended? Yes, I think you get the drift of that, don't you?
Yes.
Anybody like to comment?
Well, I mean, sorry, I feel as if I'm hogging, but
away, David.
Well, I think I saw a question, about what what have I learned from some of this process, and I think it is to be bold. And there is an opportunity here. We are, as we speak, creating evidence of things that can be done that people have questioned before. My concern is that too many parts of our system will revert back to as we were 4 or 5 months ago, whereas actually the opportunity is to sort of, I'm going to borrow a term I heard in another webinar, to bounce forward. It's not just about bouncing back from this, it's actually about the opportunity to bounce forward. So let's sort of understand the barriers and deal with them and tackle them, but let's not let the barriers stop us from bouncing forward.
Great, thank you. Eunice or Saima, do you want to make a comment on that?
From the area of the business that I work in, which is working with our clients' exams, certainly what we're trying to do is help them with exams that have already been developed. So I can see that this will drive change in the test development process to more to lend itself more to remote proctoring and reduce the risk of trying to run high volume, high stakes exams in a remote proctored mode. So yeah, it's certainly I can see that the door has now been opened, and it will lead to more developments to make the remote proctoring experience better for everyone, including the candidate. Yeah. Importantly for the candidate.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Paul, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that speaking personally, not necessarily on behalf of Cambridge Assessment, I welcome the end of protectionism. I think that the only way, the direction of travel is definitely, I think, towards more widespread rollout of remote proctoring and of e-assessment, and I think we need to involve everybody in the conversation around that. We need to involve candidates, parents, institutions, awarding bodies, because that's the way that we can have a mature debate and hopefully help to kind of preserve the integrity of our high stakes examinations for everyone.
Yeah, great. Do you want to chip in there, Saima?
Yeah, I echo everything everybody said. I think the only thing I would add is, I think as we are all referencing, bouncing forward, new direction of travel, I think new direction of risk as well. And I think it's exactly being cognizant of that and having the skills, the partners working with us across those areas, so that those new risks are managed in the same way, or if not, in a more suitable way to the technology that we're using. So I think different level of vigilance because of a different level of risk in a quite changed landscape.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you ever so much. Thank you too for Eunice and Saima standing in at the last moment. And as we said before, please send our best wishes to Paul and his family. Thank you, David and Paul, for two really fascinating conversations. I've just got a few comments to make now before we close the webinar about the E-Assessment Association and sponsors. So I'll say cheerio for now, and thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, there we are. I hope you enjoyed that, found the presentations interesting. I found them absolutely fascinating, and I could have asked lots more questions forever. So just as a close, if you're not a member of the E-Assessment Association, it's an extremely simple process and painless and doesn't cost you anything. So just go to eassessment.com/register and you'll join the 19 other e-assessment professionals around the world who are part of the organization. And we love you to be there to hear your contributions and to participate as actively as you want. And I also want to just say a thank you to our sponsors. The headline conference sponsor, you heard from Tim earlier on from RM Results, and for British Council in particular for sponsoring this week. Surpass, helping us behind the scenes, and Geo Partnership. I'm sponsoring my own company there, and to Matt and EdTech Horizons. So thank you very much to all those sponsors. Our next webinar is tomorrow at 2 o'clock. We've got Andy Lester from Ofqual. Now that should be a really good session. You can quiz him on how approachable, adaptive and supportive Ofqual are seeking to be in this environment. Peter Alston from BPP University. Peter was a judge with me on the E-Assessment Awards, and I can thoroughly recommend him. And we're delighted that Sir John Dumford is going to talk to us about the Malpractice Commission. That you may have read the report there, and we're looking forward very much to having him on board. So I'll say thank you for now and look forward to seeing you at the next session. Goodbye.